I had something happen in northern Georgia. This is the rather short version, but it still covers the details. So I spent this Monday through Thursday in the northern Georgia mountains. I was hunting and camping back then. The first 2 days, nothing out of the ordinary really happened, besides the odd couple of dead game that looked to be ripped apart. But that Wednesday night, I was sitting at my campfire, cooking some small game that I caught in the forest, when everything went eerily quiet all of a sudden for about 5 minutes. The only sound besides my fire was a really far off yell or a screech. After the screech, which I couldn't tell if it was a human or animal, it kind of sounded in the middle somewheres. The noise of the forest returned. The final night, that Friday, I was packing everything up, and then this thing came to the edge of my campsite, just out of the firelight. It had yellow eyes, and from the shadow, I could tell that it was a huge, hulking beast. I don't know how long it had been there. I thought it might be best to just get the hell out of there, so I quickly doused the fire, and then I took off. I don't know what this thing was, but I would see its eyes from different places. It would be behind me, and then in front of me, and then up a tree. It seemed like it was toying with me, stalking me, and then, for a while, it stopped. I thought maybe it got bored and left me alone. That's what I was hoping for. But I was nearly to my car when I got that uneasy feeling again. I had my shotgun ready this time. I brought it in case of bears. I turned around and I saw it again. It was maybe 20 yards away from me. I turned and I full out sprinted to my car, the eyes following close behind the whole time. As soon as I got just out of the forest, I turned and unloaded my shotgun into the direction from where I ran. Every shot, I know it hit, but it didn't seem to do anything. The eyes just still stood there, the hulking beast still looking at me. I threw everything into my car and I started backing up, and just before I left, my car was then assaulted by large rocks. It left dents and scratches on my car, including a crack in the windshield. I hauled ass out of that forest. This happened back when I was a Florida kid visiting northwest Georgia. I was staying in a cabin on a lookout mountain with my parents and my brother. My parents take my brother up to the top of the mountain. I decide to stay. I'm bored within 30 minutes and decide that I want to go. There is a wide trail behind the cabins leading up the mountain and into the woods. It's more like a dirt road. As a stupid kid with no understanding of mountains, I decide that this trail will definitely take me to the top of the mountain where my parents are. I walk for a while. The path is winding, but has no turnoffs. I'm enjoying this relaxing walk. But then the path grows smaller and unkempt the farther I travel. Stones and weeds litter what was once packed in graded earth. I pass by a dilapidated barn reclaimed by briars. I walk farther and see some old, heavy-duty equipment lying in the leaves and brush. This giant funnel-looking thing, rusted metal barrels, a plow attachment, barbed wire, and other junk. There's no bird song here. It's kinda creepy, but whatever. My parents must have taken this route, so I continue. The path is now super narrow. It's barely a footpath. I'm squeezing in between trees. It's eerily quiet. I only hear the crunching of leaves under my shoes and the wind picking up. Suddenly, the footpath opens up into a huge red clay clearing surrounded by dense woods. A car is parked, dead in the center. It's a 1960s classic Dodge Dart, in perfect condition. I don't give two shits about cars, but this thing was immaculate looking. It's shiny and baby blue. The paint is clean enough to reflect the clouds on the sky. It has a spotless cream canvas top, full leather bench seats, a chrome grille, and hubcaps that are nearly blinding. I can't believe I'm seeing this here. I don't even see a way this car could have even got up here, let alone be this clean. And then I notice that there's a middle-aged Caucasian man sitting in the driver's seat. He's wearing an outdated-looking suit and a fedora maybe. It's all black, with black sunglasses. It's kind of weird. He looks really outdated, but whatever. This is kind of a backwoods, lost in time sort of area. Most of the people were friendly at the campground, so I smile and wave. He waves and smiles back. I approach the car, ready to hit him with the, "Hey, awesome car, man," when I hear something behind me. It sounds like a rustling through the leaves. I turn around and don't see anything. I shrug. I turn back, but the car is completely different now. It's covered in rust. Only a few specks of paint remains. It's hardly blue, an absolute junker. The canvas top is ripped wide open. The grille and headlights are busted. The leather seats rotted and dry, exposing foam and springs. Not a thing was gleaming on that brown rusted POS, but there was no suit man anywhere in sight. I was thoroughly creeped out and confused. I backed away slowly. I see the small path continues on the other side of the clearing. I'm still dumb. I think that taking the path further will bring me to my parents. It's better than going back and waiting alone in the cabin, I reason to myself. It's eerily quiet. I'm trying to shake off what happened as I continue, thinking, maybe I just imagined it. But then, I start hearing what sounds like flies. No sounds but my footsteps and the buzzing of flies. I don't even see any flies in the air, but the buzzing grows so loud as I continue. I become frantic. It sounds like I'm being surrounded by this noise. Then, I get smacked in the face by the smell of something very dead and rotting. It burns my nose, waters my eyes. I scan the area. I can't see anything. The unending, droning sound of flies and the smell of decay overwhelm all of my senses. I'm filled with terror. I turn and run back down where I came from, past the clearing and the rusted out car, past the farm equipment, the old barn, and back down the large trail to the cabin. My parents and brother were already back. I tell them everything that I saw and that happened. The next morning, we all go out to the trail so I can show them the car. But the trail makes a full circle. It never narrows. It never climbs up on the mountainside. It's wide and winding with no turnoffs. It's a graded and packed regular dirt road. There are no other trails. We circle it 3 times before everyone gives up. I also circle 3 more times again by myself because I can't believe it or explain it. I never did find the path or the clearing ever again, nor do I know what would have happened if I continued walking or stayed there. A bit of background on who I am and what I do for a living. This will give a bit of context on how I've come across these reports. For the last 15 years, I've been employed as a licensed psychologist in Virginia. The firm I work for takes subcontracted work from the federal government. The purpose of this work is to give psychological evaluations and reports on cases that the state doesn't want to be subject to various oversight agencies. If there is an instance where the feds need an interview and an analysis done quickly and discreetly, then we are hired to do this. The pay is good, and the job has allowed me to travel all over the country. But with all of that exposition out of the way, it's time to move on to what happened in Georgia. More specifically, I was in an area of the 912 area code of Georgia. It was an industrial area used mainly for manufacturing chemicals. For about 3 weeks, the nighttime security had been reporting to their higher-ups about sounds in the woods and the surrounding area. Wildlife in the vicinity isn't uncommon, but what is unnerving the guards is the volume the sounds are being made at. They are reporting rustling in the woods that sound like a truck moving through it, followed by what can only be described as a massive fan oscillating. Reports continue for a few more days, but finally, the latest claims makes the nearby chemical plant take action. The security detail reports about a very musky odor coming from the woods in the direction of the sounds, followed by a fog of white vapor rising from the ground. They fear a chemical leak from the underground pipes, so they call in a state inspector. The idea was for the state inspector to supervise the plant's hired inspector to get an investigation without any hearsay between the company and the government. They go into the woods and they do their inspection. 2 days later, I am arriving in the area after a flight. My purpose was to interview the state inspector. I was to find out for the feds and the EPA why there was 1 dead man and 3 others severely injured. I was not there to solve a death, obviously, but rather to interview a state employee to register their state of mind. I arrive at a local hospital in the same city as the industrial area. I call my contact, and they come down to the parking lot to greet me. I am ushered into the inspector's hospital room by 2 police officers. In it, I see a man of Middle Eastern ethnicity. He looks to be in his late 40s. His face is swollen like he had some kind of allergic reaction. There are yellow welts all over his face and neck, as well as his arms and hands. He's wearing an oxygen mask. The man has clearly been through a lot, whatever has happened to him. I sit by him and begin to get to work. I introduce myself, and I'm beginning to make a dialogue between him and myself. At first, he is very hesitant to talk, but after an hour or so, we are able to get down to the matter at hand. He tells me that initially, he and the other inspector did a cursory look into the areas where the wounds, smells, and vapors were coming from. They found a curious sticky residue on the foliage and tree bark. The ground had been disturbed with what looks like drag marks dotting between the trees. Only these markings would have had to have been made by something the size of a small car. They could see where the nearby trees had been leaned over, like a tractor had pushed into them. Hearing this, I asked why the man or the company hadn't just called the police. Especially if there were signs of unauthorized activity, then law enforcement should be made aware, especially around dangerous chemicals. The man in the hospital bed chuckled and then coughed. He said I asked the same question, but as far as they know, Nothing was out of the ordinary, aside from just reports of sounds and movement in the woods by trigger-happy night guards, as they called them. I continued my interview with him. He explained that later in the night they were going to go into the woods with a group of security to see what was the source of all the commotion. Night fell, and the two inspectors, accompanied by 3 security officers, made their way into the woods when the sounds began. He said they walked closer and closer past the pine trees toward the noise. As they did, they could make out what sounded like something large being dragged on the ground. Then they heard slurping sounds and a slight buzz. The guards got nervous and upholstered their guns. The 5 men made their way closer and closer. As the man was telling me his story, his heart monitor began to increase in its beeps. His face made a twisted sneer of disgust as he recalled to me the smell they were engulfed in. It was about halfway from the epicenter of the noise. He said that it was a vile combination of rotten eggs, burning tires, and a decaying deer. It was at that point they began to see the white vapor on the ground. Eventually, they made their way what was to be almost on top of the sound. The man then took a deep breath and said, "That's when the shooting started." One of the guards saw it first and began to unload into a black mass in front of the group. There was a loud shriek, like nails on a chalkboard, and a vuvuzela. The man motioned with his hand and said that they shined a flashlight onto the mass. He went quiet for a few moments, but slowly told me what he saw. It was what he described as a cross between a wasp at the front, and the back was like a slug. It was about 5 meters in length and 2 meters high. It began to move toward them at an astonishing pace. It released the foul-smelling white vapor from holes in its body every time it moved. There was barely any time to act as the creature swiped at the group with these weird legs that it had, and it knocked all of them down. The man looked down and told me that everything goes black from there. That was the last thing he remembers. We finished our interview, and there I left him to himself. The report was handed over to my contact. I left it to him from there. The industrial area was closed for 18 months for renovations. The woods around the area were totally bulldozed. I am unaware at what point during the encounter that anybody else was injured, or, in the case of one inspector, pass away. 3 of my colleagues interviewed the other witnesses. Officially, the death and injuries are all because of an animal attack. This one comes from a colleague of mine. In the Athens, Georgia area, there was a state senator who had purchased a few hundred acres. He wanted to develop some of the land for his personal recreational use, but there was an old woman who was squatting on the land in a shanty cabin. The senator tried to get the local police to evict her from the land, but no one would come and do it. Call after call, the senator tried to use his power to grease the wheels and get what he wanted done, but after a few months, nothing had come of it. So he went directly to the mayor to ask what exactly was the problem. The two had a meeting at a local bar. Between drinks, the mayor told him that frankly, the townsfolk were scared of the woman. No one knew how old she was, but growing up, they all remember her living out in the woods in her little cabin. Even people that are now in nursing homes recall the woman always being there. The mayor settled down to a hushed tone and leaned into the senator's ear to whisper, "They say that she's a witch." At this, the senator reached his limit and stormed out of the bar. Come hell or high water, he was going to get that old hag off of his land. So he did. He hired some muscle from Columbus, Georgia, to come and do the deed. They finished the job by going into the woods, tearing down the cabin and burning it to the ground. The woman's belongings were tossed beside a ditch on a nearby road. The senator felt satisfied after finally getting rid of her. Soon, he would be able to use that land for whatever he wanted. But that night is when the trouble began. It had started simple enough that afternoon, when the dogs became timid and twitchy. Normally, the assertive Labradors had become a whiny mess, staying under the porch. The next thing is, while making dinner, his wife startled him with a scream. Running into the kitchen to see what the matter was, he found his wife swiping a pan at something sitting in the window. It was an opossum that was hissing at his wife, and then him when it saw him enter the room. Before he could get it, the vermin jumped off the window and ran into the yard. It disappeared into the bushes near the woods. He calmed his wife down and promised to call an exterminator the next morning. Later, after the sun went down, he tried to bring the dogs inside, but they remained under the porch. After a while, he had had enough and just left the dogs to stay under there for the night. He came in and joined his wife and newborn at the table for dinner. During their spaghetti dinner, they discussed the dogs and the opossum incident. All was strange, but, well, nonetheless. But then his wife looked down at her plate and began to gag. She pushed her plate away from her and rushed toward the downstairs bathroom. Not wanting to leave his infant daughter by herself, the concerned senator called out for his wife. He could hear her gag and retch, then finally vomit her stomach into the toilet. This went on for several minutes as she emptied her body of her dinner, probably her lunch, and anything else. Finally, after feeling enough concern for his wife, the time came to check on her. So he scooped up his daughter and walked with a steady pace to the bathroom. He leaned into the room and asked his wife if she was okay. She nodded in the affirmative, but her sweaty red face and bloodshot eyes were much more honest. The man grabbed a towel and handed it to his wife so she could clean herself up. After she had freshened up, her husband asked her what happened. She answered, "When I looked down at my plate, the noodles, they looked like writhing opossum tails." The man didn't know what to think, but he knew what to do. Clearly his wife had become stressed out because of the incident with the vermin earlier. Doing what he thought was best, he sent his wife upstairs to lay down. In the meanwhile, he cleaned the kitchen and then laid their daughter down to bed. Feeling stressed himself now, he sat down to watch some football, but he found that he just couldn't get comfortable. He felt that something was watching him, like he was being observed by a predator. He looked across the living room over towards the sliding glass doors. He saw it. Pressed up against the glass was an opossum. It was standing on its hind legs with its front paws pressed onto the glass. Its breath fogged up the door as it looked at him. Startled at first, he soon rose from the easy chair and grabbed a broom. Anger fueled his steps as he inched closer, but he felt that something was off. His gut told him to hold on for a second. From what he was able to notice, the opossum's breath grew stronger as he came closer. The less distance between him and the door, the more rabid the vermin would breathe, and the foggier the glass would get, like it was getting excited at the thought of him coming out there. His thoughts were soon cut short as his ears became deafened by his wife's screams from upstairs. Without a second thought, he ran upstairs to check on his wife and daughter. Expecting the worst, he burst into their room. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" he pled over and over. His wife was cradling their baby as it too cried like his wife. The grown woman sobbed and wheezed for breath as the infant squalled. He grabbed her shoulders and looked her in the eyes to console her. I'm here, it's okay. It's okay." Her lip trembled as she began to speak his name. He said, "Yes, baby, what's wrong? Please tell me, please." She said, "She wants to eat our baby." Oh God. She managed to get that out before going back to sobbing. It took over an hour to finally get them both to calm down, but they somehow managed. Today was the most disturbing day he had ever lived through, but for that night he wasn't taking any chances. He and his wife had moved to a windowless bedroom for the night. He locked the door and placed his 9mm under his pillow. In the morning, they were going to leave for their relatives for a few days, but for tonight, he somehow convinced her to stay. Sleep came to her and the baby surprisingly quick, but he wasn't so lucky. What his wife had said echoed over and over in his head. The memory filled him with dread, but not as much as the memory of the opossum staring him down, panting as he approached it, its frantic eyes almost begging him to come outside. He couldn't remember his dream, but he will never forget his final moments before he awoke. In the dream, he came to a clearing in the forest. Standing on a hill was a naked woman. From her leather-like wrinkly skin, he could tell she was very old. Her gangly frame turned in his direction. Her body, barely skin and bones, turned to fully face him. A disgusting sight of decrepit flesh filled his vision. Blemishes and boils, dripping yellow pus, dotted her emaciated frame. Her hair was long, tangled and gray, spouted out and dangled from her head, and went all the way to her forearms and covered her privates. Her wicked face was more like a skull, had a grimace of pure malice and unfeeling but calculated predation. She raised a bony finger at him and hissed like an opossum. The man's eyes popped open and jolted him out of his dream and back into reality, but he soon found a new, waking horror. He had been unlucky enough in his life to experience sleep paralysis once before. His mind instantly remembered the feeling as the recollection let him know it was happening now. He was awake, but couldn't move. His brain sent signals to get up or raise his arms and legs, but nothing came of it. If he wasn't panicking then, when his eyes moved down, he was panicking now. There, sitting on his legs, was an opossum, looking at him in the eyes. He tried to move, to scream, to do anything in his power, but nothing came. The opossum began to smile, a human smile, with human teeth. Then he could move. The opossum was gone. He jumped out of his bed and scanned the room. He looked over to his wife, but she was sound asleep. He made his way over to his daughter's crib. She was in a similar state, fast asleep. He wished that he could have a sigh of relief, but that never came. Instead, He took his gun from under the pillow and held it in his hand at the ready. He stayed that way for the rest of the night. Finally, in all its glowing mercy, he could see the sun from under the door. He felt that the ordeal was over. After checking on his wife and child for a final time, he made his way downstairs. He checked the house, and all seemed well. But he just had to go outside. He couldn't help himself. After everything that had happened over the most hellacious night of his life, he just had to go out there. Whether it was out of selfish curiosity or a dangerous show of dominance, he wanted to go out there and make his presence known, to show that despite all of that, this was still his land. So he did. He opened the door and went outside, and there, on his land, were the tore-up remains of both of his dogs. The viscera mixing with the morning dew to vividly paint the land and the man's mind with the image of gore. He reported all of this to the police, and the next day, my firm sent someone over to interview him. The official story was that there was an opossum infestation on the land, and they had attacked some predator that then had ended the dogs. The senator, however, ended up selling the land and moving to Atlanta. So, what'd you think of those? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? As always, I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. Down there as well is a link to a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to donate to the channel and support it that way. But also, just watching the video and liking and subscribing really helps too. And I hope that you're all staying happy, healthy, and hydrated this week. I thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and I thank you for staying for the video. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.